How did one tiny city, smaller than many suburbs, become the most fiercely contested and sacred place on earth? Jerusalem has witnessed over 5,000 years of invasions, worship, and bloodshed, shaping Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the fate of world empires. Billions of people turn their hearts here, yet almost no one agrees on who it truly belongs to or why the world would risk everything for stone and faith. If you love Jewish stories, make sure you subscribe to Jews Chronicles. The answer begins long before Kings, in the dawn of Abraham's journey. On a limestone ridge above the Gihon Spring, the earliest traces of Jerusalem begin. Archaeologists have uncovered signs of human settlement here dating back to 3,500 BCE, drawn by the promise of fresh water in a landscape shaped by drought and stone. The spring's steady flow made life possible and set this place apart in the eyes of wandering herders and farmers. Long before kings or empires, stories began to gather around these hills. Jewish tradition holds that Abraham, journeying through Canaan, entered into a covenant with God, a promise that bound his descendants to this land. The Hebrew Bible describes Abraham's willingness to offer Isaac on Mount Moriah, an act of faith that later tradition places at the heart of Jerusalem. This moment established a pattern, the land itself becoming woven into the story of a people and their God, a bond of geography and of sacred obligation. Historical records from Egypt mention a city called Ru-Salamum as early as 2000 BCE, but it is the memory of Abraham's covenant that would echo through generations. For the early Israelites, these hills were more than a settlement. They were a testimony to a promise, a place where the divine touched earth and marked out a destiny. Even as tribal confederations formed and faded in the highlands, the belief in a sacred claim endured, shaping how the land was seen, remembered, and eventually how it would be fought over. The city's earliest walls and water tunnels speak of practical needs, but the stories tied to Abraham transformed those needs into something enduring. They created a sense of purpose and belonging that would outlast any single tribe or generation. Around 1000 BCE, David set his sights on a city held by the Jebusites, a fortress perched on high ground, protected by steep valleys and the vital Gihon Spring. The city's defenses had withstood centuries of conflict, but David saw an opportunity. According to ancient texts, his forces discovered a way in, a hidden water shaft, possibly the Tzinor mentioned in 2 Samuel, that allowed a small band to slip past the walls. The attack caught the defenders off guard. Within days, David controlled the city. Choosing Jerusalem as his capital was a masterstroke. It stood outside the territory of any one Israelite tribe, making it neutral ground. No single clan could claim it as their own. By moving his court there, David united the tribes under one rule and ended generations of rivalry. The city's natural defenses, the ridge's commanding views, and its access to fresh water made it both a safe haven and a symbol of a new era. David renamed the conquered stronghold the City of David. He established his royal residence, gathered administrators, and began to transform the ancient Canaanite town into the seat of a new kingdom. Archaeological finds, massive stone structures, fortifications, and administrative seals hint at the scale of this transformation, though scholars still debate the size and power of David's realm. What is clear is that Jerusalem, once a border outpost, now stood at the heart of a united people. David's decision set the stage for the city's next chapter, the construction of a sanctuary that would define its spiritual identity for centuries to come. Solomon, son of David, inherited a kingdom now unified by conquest and vision, but it was Solomon's building of the temple that transformed Jerusalem from a royal seat into the spiritual heart of a people. In the 4th year of Solomon's reign, Around 966 BCE, construction began on a site identified as Mount Moriah, where tradition held Abraham had once raised his knife in faith. The project drew skilled laborers from across the region. Cedar wood arrived from Lebanon, quarried stone came from the hills, and artisans shaped bronze and gold for the sanctuary's vessels. The temple itself was not the largest of its age, but its design was deliberate. The main hall stretched 60 cubits long and 20 cubits wide, with a towering inner chamber called the Holy of Holies, reserved for the Ark of the Covenant. Only the high priest could enter that space, and then only once a year. Golden cherubim stood guard over the ark, their wings outstretched as a sign of divine presence. Outside, a great bronze altar and a massive basin known as the sea stood in the courtyard, where priests performed rituals and sacrifices. For the first time, worship was drawn to a single place. Pilgrims journeyed from distant towns, festivals filled the city with music and prayer, and offerings supported both priestly service and royal authority. The temple became the axis of religious life, binding the people to their God and to each other. Jerusalem was no longer just a capital. It was now the center of faith, memory, and hope. This new reality would echo through centuries, drawing the eyes of empires and the devotion of generations. In 586 BCE, Babylonian forces under Nebuchadnezzar II broke through Jerusalem's defenses. The city's walls fell after a brutal siege, and the first temple, once the heart of Jewish worship, was set ablaze. Ash and broken stones buried the streets. Archaeologists still uncover burn layers from this destruction, a physical record of the trauma. The city's elite, priests, scribes, and artisans, were led away in chains to Babylon. For those left behind, the city was a ruin, its sacred center reduced to rubble. The exile shattered more than stone. It forced a people to rethink how to survive without their temple, their capital, or their king. Yet the story did not end in despair. In 539 BCE, the Persian king Cyrus conquered Babylon. Unlike his predecessors, Cyrus issued an edict permitting exiled peoples to return home and rebuild. The Cyrus cylinder, inscribed in cuneiform, describes his policy of restoring temples and repatriating captives. For the Jews in Babylon, this decree opened a door long thought closed. Groups of exiles made the journey back to Jerusalem, carrying memories of a lost city and hopes for return. By 516 BCE, the Second Temple stood on the Old Mount. It was smaller and simpler than Solomon's, but it restored the rhythm of pilgrimage and sacrifice. The return was not easy. Those who came back faced poverty, opposition, and the daunting task of rebuilding from ruins. Still, the act of return itself became a cornerstone of Jewish resilience. The Persian policy allowed for the re-establishment of local religious life, and Jerusalem's sacred role was revived. The trauma of exile and the hope of restoration became threads woven into Jewish memory, shaping prayers, traditions, and the enduring belief that destruction could be answered by return and rebuilding. In 167 BCE, a new threat arrived in Jerusalem, not just with armies, but with decrees meant to erase the heart of Jewish life. The Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes ordered that Jewish practices be outlawed. Circumcision, Sabbath rest, and study of the Torah became crimes. Greek idols were set up in the temple, and sacrifices to Zeus replaced the ancient offerings. The city's streets filled with the symbols of a foreign culture, and the temple, once the center of Jewish worship, now echoed with rituals meant to break the spirit of its people. But in the hills outside Jerusalem, resistance was building. Mattathias, a priest from the village of Modi'in, refused to obey the king's orders. After striking down a royal official, he and his sons fled to the wilderness, calling others to join them. Among his sons, Judah Maccabee, called the Hammer, emerged as the leader of a growing revolt. What began as a desperate stand in the countryside soon turned into a full-scale rebellion. Judah Maccabee's forces waged a guerrilla war against the Seleucid armies. Outnumbered and outgunned, they struck quickly, retreating into the hills before their enemies could mount a response. Over 3 years, the Maccabees won a series of victories that stunned the ancient world. By 164 BCE, they fought their way back into Jerusalem. The temple, desecrated and abandoned, stood silent. Judah's men cleared out the idols, rebuilt the altar, and relit the menorah. For 8 days, the flames burned longer than the oil should have lasted, giving birth to the festival of Hanukkah. The victory of the Maccabees restored Jewish worship in Jerusalem and, for the first time in centuries, brought a measure of independence. The Hasmonean dynasty, founded by the Maccabees, would rule Judea for nearly 100 years. Yet their struggle was more than a military triumph. It was a defense of identity, proof that Jerusalem's meaning could not be erased by foreign power or cultural pressure. The city, battered but unbroken, remained the center of a people determined to survive on their own terms. Herod the Great arrived in Jerusalem under Roman authority, but his ambitions for the city went far beyond politics. Around 20 BCE, Herod began a project that would transform the landscape. He ordered the Second Temple expanded. He ordered the Temple Mount to be doubled in size, using massive blocks of limestone, some weighing over 500 tons, set with such precision that the seams between them are barely visible even today. The new platform stretched across 35 acres, dwarfing the original sanctuary. Herod's architects built soaring colonnades, grand gates, and courtyards that could hold hundreds of thousands of pilgrims during festival seasons. Josephus, the first-century historian, described the temple as dazzling white and gold, shining like a mountain of snow in the sunlight. The western wall, now a place of prayer and longing, was only a retaining wall for Herod's vast platform. The heart of the complex was the sanctuary itself, rebuilt with marble and gold, where priests conducted sacrifices and rituals that had defined Jewish life for centuries. Herod's temple stood as one of the wonders of the Roman world, drawing visitors from across the empire. Yet beneath the grandeur, tensions simmered. Roman rule brought heavy taxes and foreign officials. The priesthood became entangled with politics. Sectarian groups, Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots argued over the meaning of law and the future of the people. By 66 CE, anger boiled over into revolt. Jewish rebels seized Jerusalem, expelling Roman forces. Rome responded with overwhelming force. In 70 CE, after months of siege and starvation, the legions under Titus breached the city's walls. Josephus records flames engulfing the temple. Stones tumbled from their foundations. Survivors were slaughtered or enslaved. The sanctuary that had stood for nearly 1,000 years was reduced to rubble, its treasures carried off to Rome. Only the western wall remained, a silent witness to what was lost. With the destruction, the era of temple sacrifice ended. The priesthood vanished. In the aftermath, Jewish life turned inward, toward prayer, study, and the teachings of rabbis who gathered in distant towns. The memory of Jerusalem and its temple became a prayer, a hope, and a promise carried through centuries of exile. The city's ruins did not erase its meaning. Instead, they set the stage for Jerusalem to become a city of memory, longing, and faith for generations to come. Jerusalem's place in Christian history begins with a series of events that, for believers, changed the course of humanity. According to the Gospels, Jesus of Nazareth arrived in the city for Passover, taught in the temple courtyards, shared a final meal with his followers, and was arrested, tried, and executed by crucifixion outside the city walls at a place called Golgotha. His burial and what his followers experienced as resurrection 3 days later took place in a nearby tomb. These sites, Golgotha and the tomb, became the heart of Christian memory and devotion. In the centuries that followed, Christian pilgrims sought out the locations tied to Jesus' final days. Early accounts describe believers tracing his path along the Via Dolorosa, praying at the Mount of Olives, and seeking the place of resurrection. It was the 4th century that transformed the city's Christian landscape. After Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity across the Roman Empire, his mother Helena traveled to Jerusalem around 326 CE, determined to identify and honor the places where Jesus had suffered and triumphed. Constantine ordered the construction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, completed in 335 CE. Built to encompass both Golgotha and the tomb, the church became the most sacred site in Christianity, a place where heaven and earth seemed to meet. Its massive stone rotunda, chapels, and shrines drew pilgrims from across the empire. The church's dedication marked the first time a Roman emperor had invested imperial resources to anchor Christian sacred geography in Jerusalem. Other churches soon followed on the Mount of Olives, at Gethsemane, and at the site of the Ascension. Constantine's building program did more than honor memory. It mapped Christian meaning onto the city's streets and hills, making Jerusalem a destination for believers from Africa, Europe, and the Near East. Pilgrims carried away soil, oil, and relics, spreading the city's fame and deepening its spiritual pull. By the late 4th century, Jerusalem's role had shifted. Once the center of Jewish worship, it now stood as the physical heart of a global Christian faith. The city's sacred sites became places of prayer, healing, and hope, their influence radiating outward to shape Christian identity across continents. In these stones and shrines, a new story took root, one that would draw the attention of empires, kings, and millions of faithful for centuries to come. In the decades after the rise of Islam, Jerusalem entered a new chapter of sacred history. The Quran describes a miraculous journey. The Prophet Muhammad, in a single night, is carried from Mecca to the farthest mosque, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, before ascending to heaven. Early Islamic tradition identified the farthest mosque with Jerusalem, placing the city at the heart of Muslim devotion and memory. For the first years of Islamic prayer, Muslims turned their faces toward Jerusalem, underscoring the city's spiritual link to Abraham and the earlier prophets. By 638 CE, Muslim forces had entered Jerusalem. The city's Christian and Jewish communities remained, but now a new faith laid claim to its sacred geography. The Umayyad caliphs, ruling from Damascus, sought to anchor their authority not only through conquest, but through the language of sacred architecture. Abd al-Malik, the Umayyad caliph, ordered the construction of the Dome of the Rock in 691 CE. This was not a mosque for daily prayers, but a shrine built over the foundation stone, revered in Jewish tradition as the site of the temple, and in Islamic tradition as the place from which Muhammad ascended to the heavens during the night journey. The dome's octagonal structure and golden dome announced the arrival of a new religious vision. Its Arabic inscriptions, among the earliest examples of Quranic text in stone, proclaimed the unity of God and the message of Muhammad. The building itself stood as a statement. Jerusalem belonged to Islam as the third holiest city after Mecca and Medina. Soon after, the Al-Aqsa Mosque rose on the southern edge of the same platform, giving the faithful a place for communal worship and linking daily prayer to the city's sacred past. Under Abd al-Malik the Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, became a center of pilgrimage and learning. The city's landscape now reflected overlapping claims: the memory of Abraham and Solomon, the Christian churches of the Byzantine era, and the new monuments of Islam. For Muslims, Jerusalem was not only a city of prophets, but a living testament to the belief that their faith completed the line of revelation begun in these hills. The Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque transformed the city's skyline and spiritual meaning, ensuring Jerusalem's place at the heart of Islamic history for centuries to come. In the summer of 1099, Crusader armies breached Jerusalem's walls after a grueling siege. Chronicler Fulcher of Chartres described the aftermath in chilling terms: streets running red, the air thick with smoke and terror. Crusader knights, driven by vows and visions of holy war, swept through the city, killing thousands of Muslim and Jewish residents. The massacre imprinted itself on memory, not only as a military victory, but as a wound that would fester for centuries. For the Crusaders, Jerusalem was now the capital of a new Christian kingdom. Churches were rededicated, and the Dome of the Rock became a symbol of triumph, briefly crowned with a cross. Yet the city's new rulers soon faced a world that would not forget. 88 years later, in 1187, the city's fate turned again. Saladin, renowned in both Islamic and Western sources for his discipline and mercy, led his forces to reclaim Jerusalem. The chronicler Ibn al-Athir recounts how, after a negotiated surrender, Saladin forbade reprisals. Ransoms were set for Christian inhabitants, and those unable to pay were often released through the charity of others. The Dome of the Rock was restored as a mosque, and Muslim worship returned to the Haram al-Sharif. Yet Saladin also protected the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, allowing Christian clergy to remain and pilgrims to visit. The contrast with the earlier conquest was unmistakable. Violence had not vanished, but a new ethic of rule was asserted. These events did not erase the scars left by massacre or conquest. Instead, they deepened the city's role as a prize claimed in God's name, a place where victory and loss were measured not just in territory, but in faith and memory. The cycle of bloodshed and restoration shaped how Jews, Christians, and Muslims would view Jerusalem and each other, embedding rivalry and longing into the city's very stones. Suleiman the Magnificent arrived in Jerusalem in 1538 with a vision that would define the city's skyline for centuries. Ottoman records describe an urgent need to protect the city's shrinking population and its sacred sites. Between 1538 and 1541, teams of stonemasons and laborers rebuilt Jerusalem's walls from the foundations up, encircling the old city with 4 kilometers of stone ramparts and imposing gates. Each block was carefully set, some inscribed with Suleiman's Tugra, the imperial signature signaling both authority and protection. The new walls enclosed not just holy sites, but the daily life of Jews, Christians, and Muslims, offering a rare sense of security in a city often battered by outside forces. Stability endured for nearly 400 years under Ottoman rule. The sultans appointed local governors, regulated pilgrimage, and allowed Jerusalem's diverse communities to manage their own affairs within separate quarters. The city's religious leaders negotiated privileges and responsibilities through Ottoman law, and records from the imperial archives show a steady flow of petitions, taxes, and decrees. Jewish communities, in particular, grew as refugees fleeing Spain and later Eastern Europe found shelter under the Sultan's protection. By the 19th century, however, the world beyond the walls was changing. European powers began sending consuls and missionaries, building hospitals, schools, and churches. Russian, French, and British interests pressed for influence, each claiming to defend their own religious communities. Ottoman control, once firm, grew strained as foreign diplomats and financiers sought footholds inside the city. The walls that Suleiman built now enclosed not just a holy city, but a prize eyed by outsiders. The centuries-old order was giving way to new pressures, setting the stage for the next struggle over Jerusalem's fate. British soldiers marched through the Jaffa Gate in December 1917, ending 4 centuries of Ottoman rule. General Edmund Allenby entered the Old City on foot, careful not to appear as a conqueror, a gesture meant to honor its sanctity. Within weeks, British authorities began to reshape Jerusalem's future. In London, the Balfour Declaration had just been issued, pledging British support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, while also promising to protect the rights of existing non-Jewish communities. This single page of diplomatic language would ignite decades of rivalry. By 1920, the League of Nations granted Britain a formal mandate over Palestine. Jerusalem became the administrative center, its ancient streets now echoing with the voices of British officers, Zionist leaders, and Arab notables. Maps were redrawn, new laws were issued, and official reports filled with warnings about rising tensions. Jewish immigration increased, fueled by dreams of return and fears of persecution in Europe. Arab residents, many with family roots stretching back centuries, watched anxiously as neighborhoods changed and land sales multiplied. The British tried to balance these competing claims, but their policies often satisfied no one. Arab protests erupted in 1920, 1929, and again from 1936 to 1939 in what became a major revolt. Each wave of violence left scars, homes burned, lives lost, trust shattered. British police patrolled the city, but the underlying conflict only deepened. The Mandate years saw Jerusalem transformed from an imperial outpost into a focal point of modern nationalism. Debates over partition, sovereignty, and historical rights grew sharper, with every side pointing to promises made and promises broken. The city's fate, once decided by empires, now hung in the balance between two peoples, each convinced of their claim, each unwilling to yield. In 1947, the United Nations voted on a plan to divide the land of Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem set aside as an international city under United Nations administration. The ink was barely dry when violence erupted. As the British prepared to withdraw, fighting broke out in and around Jerusalem. Neighborhoods once separated by little more than narrow alleys became front lines. Jewish and Arab residents found themselves trapped on opposite sides, each fearing for their homes, their families, and their future. By May 1948, the State of Israel declared independence. Arab armies from Jordan, Egypt, and other neighboring countries entered the conflict. Jerusalem became the center of a fierce battle. Israeli and Jordanian forces clashed for control of the city's hills, streets, and holy places. Snipers watched over the narrow corridors of the Old City. Civilians sought shelter in basements, synagogues, and churches. Water and food grew scarce as siege lines tightened. When the fighting ended, Jerusalem was split in two. The city's new border, known as the Green Line, sliced through neighborhoods and families. West Jerusalem came under Israeli control. East Jerusalem, including the Old City, the Western Wall, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, fell to Jordan. Barbed wire and concrete barriers ran through former market squares. Residents on both sides lost access to places that had shaped their lives for generations. For nearly 2 decades, Jews could not pray at their holiest sites. Muslim and Christian residents in the West found themselves cut off from ancient cemeteries and sacred shrines. The division was more than physical. It was a wound that reshaped memory and identity for everyone who called Jerusalem home. Israeli paratroopers advanced through the narrow streets of East Jerusalem on June 7, 1967. Within hours, they reached the Western Wall and the Temple Mount. For the first time since 1948, Jewish prayer returned to the holiest site in Judaism. Prime Minister Levi Eshkol and Defense Minister Moshe Dayan quickly faced a decision that would echo for decades. After military victory, Israel extended its law and administration over East Jerusalem, annexing territory that included the Old City and surrounding neighborhoods. In a matter of days, the city that had been divided by barbed wire and sniper fire was declared unified under Israeli rule. The world, however, did not accept this new reality. The United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 242 later that year, calling for Israeli withdrawal from territories captured in the Six-Day War. Most nations refused to recognize Israel's annexation of East Jerusalem, insisting that the city's final status must be resolved through negotiation. Despite Israel's declaration of a unified capital, foreign embassies remained in Tel Aviv, signaling that Jerusalem's sovereignty was still in dispute. Within Israel, leaders described the reunification as the fulfillment of ancient longing. Streets filled with celebration, and government offices moved to the eastern side of the city. Yet for Palestinian residents of East Jerusalem, the new authority brought uncertainty and fear. Questions of citizenship, property rights, and access to holy sites became daily concerns. Internationally, the debate over Jerusalem's status hardened into a diplomatic standoff. Decades later, only a handful of countries have moved their embassies to the city, and each move sparks global controversy. The city stands at the center of a legal and political dispute with no clear end in sight, its sovereignty claimed but never fully recognized. Within just 45 square kilometers, Jerusalem contains the hopes, memories, and sacred stories of billions. Its significance reaches far beyond city walls or population size. For Jews, Jerusalem is the place of the ancient temple, the center of prayer and longing for centuries in exile. For Christians, it is where Jesus was crucified and rose from the dead, a city of redemption and resurrection. For Muslims, it is the site of the Prophet Muhammad's night journey and ascension to heaven, home to the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. Each faith sees Jerusalem as essential, not optional, a single city at the heart of three world religions. But the city's pull is more than religious. Jerusalem stands as a symbol of legitimacy for rulers and nations. Controlling the city has always meant more than holding territory. It means claiming a place in sacred history. Kings, emperors, caliphs, and prime ministers have all sought to tie their authority to these stones. The city's name appears in prayers, in songs, and in the founding documents of nations. It is invoked in peace treaties and in declarations of war. The weight of memory here is unmatched. Every community carries stories of triumph and loss, exile and return, hope and heartbreak. Jews remember the promise to Abraham, the glory of Solomon's temple, the agony of the Babylonian exile, and the longing for return. Christians recall the footsteps of Jesus, the Via Dolorosa, and the empty tomb. Muslims remember the Prophet's night journey and the centuries of prayer facing this city. For Palestinians, Jerusalem is a living homeland, a center of family and tradition, and a focal point for national identity. No other city draws such a steady stream of pilgrims, worshipers, and seekers, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and many more. Each year, millions visit to touch the stones, walk the ancient streets, and connect with something larger than themselves. The city's meaning is renewed with every prayer, every procession, every festival. This is why Jerusalem matters to the whole world. It is not just a place, but a living crossroads of faith, power, memory, and identity. Its story is woven into the fabric of human civilization, making it a city that belongs to many, yet can never truly be possessed by any one hand. Jerusalem's influence reaches far beyond its borders. Today, political decisions made here trigger global headlines and ripple through billions of lives. As international leaders debate its future, the city remains a barometer for religious coexistence and conflict. The world's eyes stay fixed on its ancient streets, because in Jerusalem, faith and power collide in ways that still shape our headlines and our hopes. Join the conversation and share your perspective on its enduring impact.